Hey, you guys. So, just a reminder that you are not expected to understand everything that's in this video. Just make sure you guys copy down the notes and think of questions that you can ask during class. So, in this section, we're going to talk about solving one and two-step linear equations. So, we have, the first couple steps here. Step one, clear any fractions by multiplying each side by the lowest common denominator. We'll talk about as we go over more complex examples. Step two, remove any parentheses using the distributive property, combine like terms. But for the first couple examples, we're going to be using steps 4 and 5. So step 4 says, use the addition property of equality to get all the variables on one side and all the constants on the other side. So if you take a look at our first example, we have 8 equals to n minus 4. The constants are numbers, and the variables, they're not constant because they can change. The variable can take on any value, whereas an 8 will always be an 8. The 4 will always be a 4, but the n, it could be 2, it could be 5, it could be negative 6, depending on the equation. So constants are numbers that are fixed, and then variables are the letters that we use. So we want to get all the constants on one side. So because we have an 8 on the left side and an n minus 4 on the right side, we can take this negative 4 and move it to the left. So how do we do that? Well, the inverse of subtracting 4 is adding 4, so we would add 4 to each side, and we get 12 equals to n. To move a number from one side of an equation to the other side, we're always going to use an inverse. Next example, we have negative 9x times negative 9x equals to 72. So because we have negative 9 times x, this operation here is multiplication. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. Now, we can't just divide by 9 because we're not multiplying this by 9. We're multiplying by negative 9. So we divide by negative 9. And 72 divided by negative 9 gives you negative 8, which is going to be our answer. Now, in each case, we can check our work. So when you check your work, you can take this value of n, plug it in to see if it makes a true equation. So we have 8 equals to n minus 4, and we said n equals to 12. So we're going to say, does 8 in fact equal to 12 minus 4? 12 minus 4 is 8. 8 does equal to 8, which means we did it correctly. For our next equation, we have negative 9x equals to 72, and we set x equal to negative 8. So let's take negative 9 times negative 8. That does equal to 72, so we know that this answer is correct. And you can do these checks for any answer you have. Next, we have negative q over 5 equals to 7. Now let's think about the operation. The q is being divided by 5, and the inverse of division is multiplication. So we are going to take the division of 5 and use its inverse. So we're going to multiply by 5. But if you multiply just by 5, the negative doesn't go away. So we have to make sure we multiply by negative 5. So the negative times the negative is a positive. The 5s are going to cross out, and we're going to get q equals to negative 35. Next example, we have 4 over 5k equals to 8 over 15. Now normally, the inverse of multiplying is dividing, so we would divide both sides by 4/5. Okay, but we can't divide by a fraction. Okay, dividing by a fraction is not okay. So we have 4 over 5k equals to 8 over 15. Well, if we can't divide by a fraction, then what can we do instead? So instead of dividing by a fraction, we can actually multiply by the reciprocal of the 4/5, which is 5/4. So on this side, the 5's cross cancel, the 4's cross cancel, we have k by itself. Now on the right side, you have two choices. You can either cross cancel, or you can multiply across and then reduce. So I'll show you both ways. If you multiply across, 8 times 5 is 40, 15 times 4 is 60. Now 40 and 60, you got to think about what is the biggest number that can divide 40 and 60. So I know that 20 can divide 40 and 20 can divide 60. So this gives me 2/3 as my answer. That's if I do it the multiplication way. If I cross cancel, 4 goes into 4 once, it goes into 8 twice, 5 goes into 5 once, it goes into 15 3 times. 2 times 1 is 2, 3 times 1 is 3, and we get our answer of 2/3. Next equation, we have 12x minus 15 equals to negative 11. So we have to first get the 12x by itself because the 12 is attached to the x, so we can't divide by 12 quite yet. So our first step is going to be to move the negative 15 to the right. And the opposite of subtracting 15 is adding 15. So we add, and we get 12x equals to 26. I'm sorry. It's negative 11 plus 15, so that'll be positive 4. Since x is being multiplied by 12, we divide both sides by 12, and we get x equals to 4 over 12. Every fraction has to be reduced, so I think about which number can divide both 4 and 12, and that'll be 4. So my answer is going to be 1/3. Okay, my next equation is 3 minus 18x equal to negative 9. My first step is to get that negative 18x by itself. So I have to move the 3 to the right. How do I do that? Well, the opposite of 3 is a negative 3. So we're going to have negative 18x is equal to negative 12. Since the x is being multiplied by negative 18, the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I divide both sides by negative 18. Now here's what happens. On the left side, we get x because negative 18 divided by negative 18 is 1. On the right side, because I have a negative divided by a negative, it gives me a positive. And then I have a 12 over 18. So I think to myself, which number can divide 12 and 18 at the same time? And that number is 6. So 12 divided by 6 is 2, 18 divided by 6 is 3, and my answer is 2/3. All right, let's take a look at our next example. Sorry, having some technical difficulties here. Okay, let's take a look at our next example. We want to solve the equation negative 14 equals to negative 2 minus 36x. So first step is we have to get that negative 36x by itself. Whatever number is attached to the x, we got to get that by itself. So how do you move the negative 2? Well, we're going to add 2 to both sides. If we add 2 to each side, this gives us negative 12 equals to negative 36x. Now the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So instead of multiplying by negative 36, I'm going to divide by negative 36. So this crosses out. I get the x by itself. I have negative 12 divided by negative 36. Now a negative divided by negative is a positive. And then we can think about which number can go into 12 and 36 at the same time. And that would be 12. So this will give us 1 over 3. Next equation, we have 3x over 4 plus 5 equals to 2. Step 1 is always to get that x by itself and whatever number is attached to it. So the opposite of adding 5 is subtracting 5. So we're going to subtract 5 from each side. This gives us 3 over 4x equals to negative 3. Now, one tip that I recommend is anytime you have one fraction, make the other number into a fraction as well. And the way you do that is by simply adding a 1 on the denominator. In this previous example, we talked about how we can't divide by a fraction. Instead, we multiply by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 3/4 is going to be 4/3. So we're going to multiply both sides by 4/3. Now, what does that do? The 3's cross cancel, and we're left with negative 4 over 1, which is just going to be negative 4. This next example, let's save this one for class. Okay, moving on, we want to solve the equation w minus 6 over 5 equals to negative 7. Well, think of the w minus 6 as one parentheses because it's on the numerator, and that's being divided by 5. So first step is we're going to multiply both sides by 5 to get rid of it. So this gives us w minus 6 is equal to negative 35. And then the opposite of subtracting 6 would be to add 6. If I do that, this gives me w is equal to negative 29. Now, when we have parentheses with the number on the outside, we have to use something called a distribution. So then that's when you have a parentheses with a number on the outside. That number gets distributed to the parentheses. So 3 times y is 3y, 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, and that equals to 15. Now we can solve that equation. I want to get the 3y by itself, which means I add 6 to both sides. This gives me 3y equals to 21. I divide both sides by 3, and it gives me y equals to 7. Okay, the next one, let's do that one in class.